Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Farino, and for my ITN252 Networking 3 final presentation, I'm going to be demonstrating enabling network time protocol and also utilizing Cisco Discovery Protocol. Uh, I'm focusing on enabling the network time protocol because it is a very important feature to have on the networks when it comes to having to troubleshoot a lot of issues. Because if you don't have an accurate time represented on all um, systems within the network, it's going to be very hard to figure out when a vulnerability may have occurred, or if there was some type of malicious activity, or if a piece of hardware ended up failing. So you want to have all of your systems tied into the same time sort. So that's really the most important part for making sure that the NTP is configured. In terms of using Discovery Protocol, it's just a great tool to have, especially for somebody that's maybe coming in to a new network. They're not really sure, maybe they didn't receive great documentation from their predecessors, or they're going to work for, a company that just hired them on and they didn't maintain great records, just so that they can really get an idea of what the actual network layout and configuration is. So I'm going to jump in, and thank you for watching my presentation. First, I'll just give a little overview of the sample network that I ended up setting up. I have a couple different networks here just to kind of First, I'll just go over the layout of the networks that I created for this demonstration. So I'm working with 5 different networks here: 172.20.1.0, 10.1.1.0, and then put the label up with the network between the first route, which I need to change. First, I'm just going to give a little overview of the sample network that I designed. Within this network, I have 5 subnetworks to be working off of here. So it's 172.20.1.0, 10.1.1.0, 10.1.2.0, and then 172.20.2.0. And then the network that I've did not label is the one between the router NTC1 and the NTP server that's set up. So that one's 10.1.3.0. So before I actually go in and configure the NTP on the server and get it set up, we can just kind of check the different routers with the simple command, show clock, and that would get the time that is running off of the router currently. As you can see, going back to 1993, that certainly can use an update. So now my next step is just going and making sure that on the NTP server that I'm going to be using, that NTP is actually set up and enabled. So you would go to services, and as you can see, it's currently disabled. So once I enable that, then the NTP server itself should be running off of the current time, which the date is April the 24th, 8:57 and 9 seconds. Uh, so with that done, I would then move over to the first router within my system. I have that named NTC1 for network time client number 1. So one of the ways that I can go about setting this up would then be to put in the IP address of the NTP server that I ended up creating. So what I would need to do is then put in the configuration mode on that server, or on the router, I'm sorry, and then put in the IP address of the NTP server, which would be command would be NTP server, and then 10.1.1.0. 3.2. I'm also going to update the calendar on the NTP server. So you would do that with the command NTP update and then hyphen calendar. But why that's not going through? Oh, because I'm not in configuration mode. That would be it. Okay, now that's also updating the calendar. And then the next step is just to ensure that these settings went through. So the way that I can end up doing that then is to use the show clock command. And then it has indeed updated to the current time and the current date in the calendar. And I'm also just going to hop back into server and then just making sure that that is configured on as well because it's also very good to if you're going to be using syslog, you have to have the NTP on just so you're getting that accurate reading of all the different events that are taking place. Now, before I configure the other routers to connect to the NTP server, I'm just going to confirm that it is indeed set up on the first client. So the command that you would use to do that is show NTP associations. And then it shows the IP address of the NTP server. And then also that's key, that's the stratum. So that's how many hops away it is from that authoritative source. So then as I go down to the network to the next router, then that stratum number will increase. So moving on to the second router, which is the NTP client 2. I have NTP C2. I went and verified I did the show clock, and now it is showing an incorrect time and date going back to 1993. So once again, we're just going to do the same steps that we did on the previous router, so that you would go back into configuration mode and then NTP server, and then you would put in the IP address of that server. So 10.1.3.2. And then I'm also going to do the calendar update again. And then with that, that should be enabled. Sometimes it does take a little bit of time for this to update. Show clock. Yep, so it's still going to take a little more time. See if we can speed that up. And we'll do show clock again. Nope, still waiting a little bit, so I will pause and come back. So it took a few minutes, but you can see now show clock. It has updated it to the current time, 9:25 p.m. and that April 24th, 2023. And then we can also check the association. So it's show NTP associations. Number 2. Now, for some reason, this stratum still showing 1. So after a little bit of troubleshooting, I believe why the stratum is still showing up as 1 on client 2 is that I set the NTP server address for the actual server itself. So what I'm going to try to do is change the NTP server for client 2, and I would do that to the client number 1. So I'm going to go back into configuration mode. So we get to the right screen. No NTP server, and then the address would be 1.3.2. And then I'm going to change that to NTP server. Should be 10.1.1.1. And then keep it again. And then we're just going to give this a few minutes to take. And yes, so that was my mistake. Um, so when I put in client number 1, that stratum did actually change to 2. With NTP up and running, as I mentioned earlier in my intro, having this standard time across the entire network would be helpful, if you would have some type of event occur in the network. So, that's very useful with the syslog server. So what we can do is we could set up one of the routers now on this configured with NTP to start logging to the syslog server. So in order to do that, what we can do is we can see if it's configured to do the syslog uh, logging. At this point, it's not. So the way that we would do that is then we would go back into configuration mode um, for the router. And then the command that you would use for that would be service timestamps log time sec. And then with that enabled, then you would configure that router to start logging to the syslog server by providing the IP address of the syslog server. So you would do that by logging host and then putting in the IP address. Yeah. And then a way that we can test this is, I can go and create uh, a loopback interface, and then I can disable the loopback interface, and then that should generate some traffic in the syslog server. Configure T, and enter, and then it's hello. 0, and then that takes it up, and then to take it down, that would just be enter L. And then you can go into the syslog server itself. And then now you can see that there is some events that are generated. And then you really just want to look at the time column there. As you can see that it is matching up to the time that was uh, configured because of the NTP. For the final part of my presentation, it's going to just be a demonstration of using the Cisco Discovery Protocol or CDP to gain information as to how a network is connected if for some reason you're not able to see or have the correct documentation of all the different devices, IP addresses that are associated with the network. So the way that you can do that is you can act as like an end user device. In this case, I can go into the PC, and then you can use SSH or Telnet to get in to the device within the network to start the mapping process. So I did not set up a username on this router, so I'm going to end up using Telnet for this demonstration, but just keep in mind that Telnet is not secure. You should be using SSH. But this will get me inside of the router that I want to start with, which would be that NTP client 2. So what I would do is I would end up putting in the IP address of that device, and then I just have to put in the password that I configured. And then once I am in, I do have CDP uh, enabled on that device. So first step then for me would be to do the show CDP neighbors. And then I can see what this router is connected to. So you can see that it is connected to a switch. And then coming out of the router's gigabit 0/0 interface, and then it's connected to Fast Ethernet 0/1 on that switch. Then you can also see going in the other direction that that router is connected to another router designated by that R there in TC1, which would be the network time client number 1. And then it's going out of its serial 0/00 um, into the serial slash zeros 0/0/0. But in terms of mapping purposes, trying to see what else may be out there on the network, this is not very useful. So what you can end up doing is using the command show CDP neighbors detail. And then you can see this gives you a lot more information, which, for good or bad purposes, if somebody is accessing a network for not so good reasons, by getting all of these IP addresses, then they can definitely do some damage. So you do want to disable CDP on any of the interfaces that are kind of outward facing, just as a security's best practice. Because with this information now, I can see that I have a 10.1.1.1 address, so then I can try and SSH it into that device, and we'll say that I'm doing this for good purposes. So with that in, um, I can go back to my PC, put in that IP address, and, and then I will be able to repeat this process and start piecing together everything that is within this network. taking a minute, so I will pause while this is up. So unfortunately, I'm just having some connection issues where Telnet keeps timing out when I'm trying to log in to NTC1. Basically, what you would just keep doing is repeating that process as you use the show CDP neighbors detail. You can get the IP address of the next connected interface of the device, and then you would just keep logging into those devices until you've reached the end. There's no more devices to go, and then you would have a complete network map to work off of. So thank you all for watching my presentation, and thank you for a great semester, and I wish everybody the best.